But welcome again. My name is Dennis Domer, and I have been directing the project on new cities here for the last, this is into my third year now. And we have made a lot of progress in various ways. As you might expect, we have a big agenda going, and a pretty big agenda for 2013. I just want to catch you up with that just a bit. Of course, on our agenda is to continue to reach out to the university community and the professional community and the Lawrence community in Kansas City in particular about new ideas and issues that are coming to our table as we consider changing the future of aging, particularly in Lawrence, but also joining that movement in the United States. And the Boomer Futures think tank, like the one we're having today, gives us a chance to come together and look at various ideas that are important. By the way, the next think tank, Dr. Philip Stafford, the director of the Center on Aging and Community at Indiana University at Bloomington, will be coming. On January 31st, we plan a community session. I'll tell you why this is very important. And then we'll have a regular Boomer Futures think tank on February 1. Stafford has been running the gerontology center there basically for 30 years. He has 3 books out, lots of experience, and he's been very interested in the project here at KU because we've been so interdisciplinary in our approach, which is sort of atypical at university life, because we tend to just come out of our disciplines rather than crossing disciplines. And as an example of the kind of interdisciplinary approach that we've taken to aging and architecture in particular, our think tank presenters, while we've had 7 architects speak, we've also had 5 sociologists, 3 people in finance and organization, 2 computer scientists, 2 biologists, 2 psychologists, geographer, English professor, lawyer, political science, ecologist, historian, American studies professor, and today we have designer in Greg Thomas. So while at the university, some people might say, well, you're just scattered, you're all over the place. Where people say I'm scattered, I say I'm interdisciplinary. And I say to them, you ought to scatter yourself. You scatter your brain a little bit outside of your disciplines, because there's a great deal to be learned. And the fact of the matter is that aging is so complex, which I've learned over the last 3 years, that to try to approach it from one perspective will definitely lead you into a corner that will be hard to get out. So I must say that at least in these 3 years for me, I've learned a great deal. Now, so the Boomer Futures think tank is going to continue to be on our agenda. A new, not so new, project we've been working on is an interdisciplinary community in Lawrence, which has begun to take wings. Come in, sir, come in. For the first time, and a long time as far as I can tell, we have the city, the county, the Lawrence Memorial Hospital, and the University of Kansas on the same page to consider the development of an intergenerational community in Lawrence. We're now calling it a new village of Lawrence underneath the new city's imprimatur. And we have been meeting with developers and landowners and politicians and financial experts kind of as in a pre-design process to the point now that probably by February we will bring in a group of developers who may be interested in this. We will present them with the issues and aspects of the project that we would like for them to address. We will formalize a proposal for them to respond to, and we will eventually be selecting somebody. Now, the city has decided that this new village here in Lawrence will be a not-for-profit. It's decided that it will be a not-for-profit, which means that different kinds of developers will be interested in it. That was a very big step. And you're going to hear more and more about that as we go along. But that's very important and very exciting. We are also working with the East Villages project in East Lawrence, which is more of a social fabric development, which helps people age in place. All of this is about more or less aging in place, at least someplace aging in place, and the Villages in East Lawrence is very important. We are continuing to develop a number of research projects. One is an automated house, which we've called the Biome. Professor Mahbub Rashid is directing that. We have individuals from outside of our university community in industry, technology, who are here, who are working with us. And that is moving along. We also have a KU field station project, which we're tangentially working on, and that is a sustainable technological residence about 10 minutes away here. I think it's about 8 miles at the KU field station, which is related to aging in place and barrier-free architecture, because we're not going to design any more architecture that isn't based on universal design principles, and that will be another example of it. In other words, designing for people of all ages, not just older people. We also have an architectural studio sequence that is going along. We have one working. Mahbub taught one this summer. Bill Carswell, a segment of his studio this fall, is working on it, and Bruce Johnson in his health and well-being studio next semester will spend a month on the scale of this community on aging at the urban design scale. So he's going to be working at a slightly different scale. We will then have a film and aging class, which was very successful last year, and we will continue to do. And then finally, I've been working on an I-70 corridor infrastructure on interdisciplinary research and aging between MU, KU Med, UMKC, the University of Kansas, Washburn University, Kansas State University, I should say, and Fort Hays, which is a bigger project, but basically trying to create a organism along I-70 which puts together its strengths along the lines of aging research, rather than being molecularized and actually so much in competition that we beat each other up over research projects. It also means that it will facilitate creating research teams that don't have all the members that you want just in one place. Basically, if we don't have them here, we can't do it. Well, what do you mean if we don't have them here, we can't do it? What about all these other people that we might be working with? So that's a complex problem, but one that I think well worth doing. And the Mid-America Research Council said to me the other day that this is the piece that is not set up in the region yet, and they're very interested in this initiative. So we're touching upon some nerves here, but we're not big. I'm here more or less by myself with a few wonderful people who volunteer, either students, Brenna Buchanan, Bob Buchanan, of course there's always John Shreve, and then we have people who are behind us, like John Gaunt, the School of Architecture. We couldn't operate without him.
I represent aging in place.
You do? Sit right down there and hang in there. And we have early people who've been with us all along, like Lee Foster from the CDC Corporation, who's been quite interested in one of our sponsors. So I probably should write this up in more detail, but I just want you to know that we are live, yes? And that we're working on a number of things. And sometimes, come in, Kathy, sometimes I feel like a hydra-headed monster here. I keep splitting my heads on these various places, but I think it's still going somewhere. Now, we actually do have a new website in which all of these lectures are on that website, and Brenna Buchanan and others have worked very hard on it, and it's not a finished product yet by any means. Maybe it will never be finished. But I think that you can still begin to see where we're going, and we're going to put much more on it. So it's www.newcities.ku.edu. Isn't that right, Brenda?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you can take a look at that. So we're down to Greg Thomas, Professor Greg Thomas. Come in, come in. Hi, Rosemary. We're down to Greg Thomas. Down to him, we're up to him, I would say, to Greg Thomas. Greg Thomas has quite a career, and he came to us only 6-7 years ago. He graduated with a BFA at the Kansas City Art Institute and then got an MFA degree at the California Institute of the Arts, which is in Valencia. And then he set up a business, Greg Thomas Associates, in Southern California in LA, and worked as a designer, professional for 30 years, worked for IBM, CBS,
everybody with 3 initials.
Anybody? Yes, that's right. The Eames
CIA,
there, among others. And he came to us then 7 or 8 years ago to first chair the Department of Design, and then go into his own really important research work and the most recent grants that he's gotten come out of Ford Motor Company to look at the nature of the automobile, and in this case, the connection between the automobile and the new kinds of housing that we're going to be seeing in the future. So we have 1 foot, I hope, in the real world and 1 foot in the dream world. And if you can take us through reality and through a few of your dreams here in the next 30 minutes or so, Professor Thomas, I'm sure that you're going to have a rousing reaction. So thanks a lot for being a part of it.
Well, thanks, Dennis.
Okay.
Nice to see some familiar faces and some not, but I'm going to give a really interesting talk on garages, which, you know, can everybody see this? I don't know if this, how well this pillar does for us.
You may have to move around.
Yeah, we can. There are actually things you have to read on here, because I'm not going to read them all by myself. But yeah, so we'll start off with the garage. And you know, we're talking about really a long time ago, turn of the century, and the history of the garage was mainly they were carriage houses, or they kept the horses in them for the carriages, and you didn't want those close to the house for obvious reasons, so they were usually back in the back. But somewhere in the 20s, things started to change, and garages were being built. That's when the automobile came in, and they wanted to have the automobile closer, and for a lot of other reasons. You know, there's some chronology that goes with this, and there's also some terminology. When you talk about a garage, there's a difference between a garage and a built-in. A built-in is actually where the house or building encompasses it, takes it over, and the attached is much like what all of us have today, which you're going to have your house and then something stuck to the wall, and you're able to go in and out through your house, basically. So in 1919, Colliers warned that the car, if it wasn't stored in a heated place, could end up being frozen, and rattled doors, and the fenders would bend, and the paint would crack. So that got everybody thinking, well, maybe we should build this space or have something a lot closer to us. And really, around 1914, Sears and Roebuck and a company called Aladdin were the primary people that were making these kits that you could buy and bring back to your home and set these garages up. And that was around the 20s, and they ranged from about $500 to $1,200 for a garage. What would that get you today if you were trying to build a garage? Not much, probably. So it wasn't until about the 30s that they really came in very strongly, and it was common to share a walk with the house, and the attached garage still ran the risk of looking like an afterthought. And somewhere around the dawn of the post-war years, in around 1945, the attached garage was being recognized for its added value in storage, to store things. So today the garage continues to grow in size and prominence, and today a 3-car garage is usually visually aggressive, so much so that the house now fits in the background. If you drive around some of the newer houses in West Lawrence, you'll see that the garage is the most dominant aspect of the house. So these are Aladdin buildings. Probably everybody knows an aunt or grandma or somebody who had one of these in the back of their property. and they're probably still there and look like this one. But they were the things that we were talking about that you could get and put together pretty easily. Just again, for those moments when you're in a cocktail party and don't have anything to talk about, garage is a French word. The French word garer, I can't even say it, garer, G-A-R-E-R, and which means to shelter or to protect. And that's what they were doing with their automobiles at that point. So again, in the 20s, you see a lot of advertising start to be directed towards that way. It became more fashionable to create ornaments and make these structures have a little bit more statement than they used to have. And you know, some of the most greatest inventions were made in garages. You know, we don't often think of that too much, but Thomas Edison's lab was at one point in a garage in the late 1800s. The Wright brothers, it's a little bit bigger than a normal garage, but you know what they were doing there, so it had to be. But they were basically buildings that were out in the back part of their land. Henry Ford developed his first car in this building, and again, you can see not a lot of room to work with, and he was only producing one, so I don't think he needed a lot of space at that time. And companies like Hewlett-Packard, a lot of companies we know did have their start in something more humble, in a dwelling or building such as this instead of others. And I think one of the more interesting one is Mr. Jobs, who started his company, this garage, and wasn't part of the kitchen and refrigerator, so I guess that helped too. But you know, as the garages became more public, you can see this guy was busy doing a lot of tube repairs, which I guess were problematic at that point because of the streets and the way they were constructed. So there was a big business there, and a lot of garages were made to be public service places where you could get this kind of work done or whatever repairs or gas you needed. And then we jump really far ahead and have to include this. I think Dennis mentioned I worked for the Eames, and when we used to do exhibits, Charles was always very adamant about putting everything he could into these exhibits. If you've ever seen an Eames exhibit, there's just too much content there. And I asked him about that once, and he said, my point in doing this was that I want somebody to leave remembering something. They don't have to remember all of it, but just something. And so that's what this presentation is about. There's a whole myriad of things here that hopefully when you leave you'll remember. But the movies, one of the key elements in some of the movies that we've seen and or remember are about buildings and the automobile relationship. Did any of you remember The Fifth Element? This was able to come up right to your 12th floor apartment, and your windows would open up and you'd be able to get in it. And interesting concept. I hope you don't trip. And then, you know, there's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, flying cars. That's pretty interesting, and somehow it'll fit in this conversation as well. And Blade Runner, which was a really great look at the future of Los Angeles. It's a great film, it still holds up, and the art direction in it is something awesome. And of course, one of my favorites was The Time Machine. We're talking about cars or moving devices and structures. Well, if you remember, Rod Taylor went many years in advance and never even moved. He went into, into the future. And the whole world changed around them. So that was kind of an interesting premise. And then we can't talk about these interiors unless we mention the Batman. If you remember the TV version with Adam West, he had all kinds of gadgets there and to fight crime with. But the newer one, in the Black Knight, again, a little different take on what that garage would be. A lot of things came up from the floor and the inside, so they were all hidden basically, and you had this pretty much this empty shell except for his tumbler or the vehicle he used. So then we just segue somehow, I don't know how, but into big parking garages. These again are places that you put your car because you want them to be safe from the elements. You have to put them somewhere. And so I think, I'm very interested in how parking garages play a role in this. And if you've been to Miami, this is when it was being constructed, but it's now finished. And I think the next slide will show that. But when I first saw it, I couldn't figure out what it was until I realized it was a garage. It's an incredible building, and it just makes this huge statement about being a garage. And this is what it looks like. And if you're familiar with the area, this is all pedestrian areas, concourses, and so it sort of looms above everything. But quite an interesting building. And then in Germany, of course, after you have a parking garage, it's not having one that worked and looked like this, where the cars are actually deposited at the ground level, and much like an automat, they're brought up into the building and deposited in little compartments. So that's a little bit more apparent when you look at this. So I think that's sort of like a laundromat used to be, if you remember. Not a laundromat, an automat. So one was where you get the sandwiches out of. Okay. And even close to home, we have one that's, I think, very interesting, where the designers, architects, just use the skin on the outside of the facade to basically tell what you're going to be dealing with here, which is the public library. I think incredible design, and the scale of it, the way it fits into that environment is pretty interesting. But there's actually houses, cars, and that's great. So one that I'm very familiar with, because I live not too far from here, was the city parking in Santa Monica, and it was done around 2009. And they spent about $1.5 million for the solar panels that are on top, but they didn't feel bad about that because they figured that it's going to pay for itself in about 17 years by generating roughly around $90,000 a year in electricity savings. So that investment seemed to be pretty good. But it's an interesting building during the day, but it's even more at night when they do use some of that energy. So another area of garages that I'm interested in is the whole parking experience. How many of you gone to the mall, especially during a very important part of the year, like the holidays that are coming up, and there are just no parking spaces that we keep going around and around and around. So what is the remedy to solve that? Well, some companies and malls have really taken the initiative to try and help. You might have seen some of these where it tells you that stall number 1306 is empty and you're only on the 5th floor, and so there's a race to get there. And actually I think it causes a little bit more problems. But they are trying to work on something that might be helpful, and I have seen a case where it has been very successful. And this is in Century City. And this is great. This goes all the way up the parking lot. And when you're very far away, you'll be able to see a green or red light, and you know that that space is empty. So you can go right there. You don't have to wait for somebody to back up. You don't have to keep driving around looking for that empty space. It tells you very easily. So that's really great, part of the design of this parking structure. So again, other kinds of structures that service the needs of cars and that building and car component are the gas stations. I didn't go into a history of the gas stations, but this is a BP station actually in Los Angeles, and pretty interesting, and makes a pretty big statement. I think what's pretty cool too is typical of LA, they've left the signpost or incorporated the signpost into the architecture, where they sort of work with each other, and that form sort of wraps itself around that sign. So it kind of makes a nice statement together. So other parking garage, this is done for the Citroen automobile, and it was a special automobile. It was called the C6, It was done around 2006 and was constructed of light transmitting concrete and transparent sliding doors of reinforced polycarbonate sheets, allowing for the opacity to get dull or opaque when he wanted to by flicking a switch. We know those kind of things happen. We have that kind of event that provides a similar thing over at our Center for Design, where we can control the density of or the opacity of the windows by a simple rheostat. So, now we're going to go, since we're starting to touch on personal garages and people that have some very nice cars want to protect those nice cars. And who can forget this building that was in Ferris Bueller? You remember that one? And I had this very expensive Ferrari, and they filmed it there. And this was built by the owner, whose house was back here, sort of a Philip Johnson take on a building, but it was only there to house his collection of cars. And it was pretty gut-wrenching when this thing went through the back window. They did use 3 cars to film that with, but so I think taking after that, there's a person in Los Angeles. Again, a lot of this car-house sort of relationships happen in LA because that's what your life's about. So Holger Schubert's, this is Holger Schubert's house in Los Angeles, and you can see that the car actually becomes part of the venue, of the environment. And so he's created this whole living room based on that. And very expensive car, he loves it, so why isn't it part of the house? And so that theme of really personalizing the space for these vehicles continues again in the next couple of slides that we'll look at. And of course, the cars you do understand why, except for this one, which is a Mini Cooper, and why it should have so much structure behind it is kind of, you'd like to talk to the owner of that, or the architect. Usually they're there to protect the vehicles, and like our original where we started out, to keep them away from those elements and those things that could corrupt the metals and do those kind of things you don't want to have happen to them. But then, they do become parts. There are cars underneath here where the structure and the landscape, sort of bury them. And then there are other structures like this, which is a concept, I believe, but this is on a sea coast, and this is a bridge that goes from one of the sides of the cliff to the other side just to house a car. Can't imagine what that would cost, but if you have a car like that, it probably doesn't matter. But then there's some simple things, just providing the ability to keep it housed in an environment where the elements aren't going to hurt it too much. This is probably just, you probably can drive in from a different part of the slope, or in this case you create something that shelters the car by itself. And then if none of that stuff works and you're really limited in terms of space, you just put it into your floor, and when you want it, you can raise it up and drive away with it. This particular owner has about 9 of these kind of cars, which he can move around downstairs, and the one he wants, he can bring it up and drive it away. So a little more inexpensive view of how to do that would be these. It's still expensive because you got a lift, but this owner can take their choice of which ones they want to go with, and you can even check on your neighbors, I guess, if you're standing up there. So, my interest in these kind of things have gotten me to go down several different paths, and one of them was to find this magazine that was done in the late 1950s. It was a House and Gardens magazine, and it was called The Living Garage. And I think, well, that's interesting because I'm interested in garages and their utilization of being utilized for different purposes. And so they had this whole essay on the car and the house interface, and it was interesting because they actually, like the gentleman in LA, actually had the car as a main focus point in these living spaces. So the article is fairly long, pretty comprehensive, And it talks about things, and I'll read this for some of you in the back that can't that far. But one of the quotes from the article says, "The automobile long has been one of life's essentials. In fact, there are a few times in the lives of many American families when the home itself almost seems to serve as a way station between motoring sorties to the shopping center, the school, the railway depot, and the PTA meeting. For years, architects have shown a recognition of our mobile nature in the design of our houses. They have made the garage an integral part of the house, and they have paid close attention to its key place in the circulation of family traffic. But aside from fulfilling its part-time role of sheltering the auto, the conventional garage is too often a lamentable waste of precious space." So they went on to talk about how you could change that space, and it was a lot of things about incorporating the car in the physical space itself. So we're moving fairly rapidly now. We're up to about, well, not up to about, we're at 1981. And there was an interesting project that was done by a fellow by the name of Ray Cappy. Anybody here Ray Cappy? Good. Somebody in the back knows, and you should. Ray Cappy is a really great Southern California architect. He is known most recently for a LEED Platinum house that he has done in Santa Monica, and I would encourage you to go look at this. I mean, he has things in it that has plants that produce the oxygen that you can breathe. I mean, everything you can think of, Cappy has put into this building. But in 1981, he created this concept. It was funded by NASA, and it was known as the Advanced Technology House, and it was commissioned by the CCAIA, which is probably California, I don't know who it is, and NASA. But unfortunately, it never got built because President Reagan was in office then, and he vetoed a lot of budget cuts, made a lot of budget cuts, and this was one of them. But it's an interesting concept, but you won't find it in any books or anything. It didn't get made. But it was a modular series, or a series of modular pieces that fit together. And in fact, one of those pieces was similar to a car that could back out of the modular unit and drive away and go do the shopping and eat, and then come back and become, again, a component of that. I also forgot to mention that Ray Cappy is the person that began the California architecture school called SCI-Arc, and that's the Southern California Institute of Architecture, and they have done some pretty cool projects at SCI-Arc that Mr. Cappy was the catalyst for that. So again, here is this was kind of a plan of the project, and it's unfortunate these are the only couple of documents that exist from it, but we wish it probably would have gotten done. So now the garage starts to get to where we understand it, and that's it becoming another room. And probably most of you, I don't know how it is here in the Midwest, but in Los Angeles, nobody uses their garage, at least in my neighborhood, for a car. Since you're 72 degrees most of the year, and there's no ice, there's none of the bad things that happen to it, your car usually sits out on the driveway, and your garage becomes another room. So there's a case where just redecorating filled the purpose of providing another library and a dining spot. So that's pretty cool. But now if you go to the web and you Google smart garages, what you're going to find is you're going to find a lot of businesses that talk about redecorating, putting new cabinets in your garage so that you can get rid of some of that clutter. It's basically, it's not smart in the context that we're thinking of, that we're going to be talking about. It's just cleaning it up and making it more orderly. And usually you'll find a couple of these guys, they're the ones that are doing it. They're just guys that make your garage a little nicer. And so I think, again, when we start looking at this environment and the car, because they have to go together, we end up finding things like this that we feel are interesting. A couple of years ago, Toyota had a minivan. I think it was called the Sienna, if I'm not mistaken. And they did a whole series of ads. They created this culture of this family that loved this minivan. And in fact, the minivan became this new room. So it was an addition to the house. It was just parked out in the driveway. But if you listen and see what she's talking about here, it's a little cheesy in terms of the person, but I think they meant it to be that way. And hope you can hear this, and then it works. Yeah.
Frankly, the idea of owning a minivan used to make me cry myself to sleep at night. But I gotta say, my Sienna is great. It's super stylish. Oh, and the available dual view entertainment center, awesome.
Hold on, I just finished episode 8. Oh boy, if I wasn't married.
I tell my husband, the more time I spend in it, the less stressed I feel. And the fewer headaches I get.
Honey, Mommy's having a timeout, okay?
Meet the family and the new Sienna on YouTube. Toyota.
There's another one, so brace yourself. But I think the interesting part about these, and why I like to show them, is because they're actually talking about an added guest room now by purchasing this vehicle.
The one thing I really look forward to is resting. Beauty sleep, which I clearly get a lot of. Because I'm beautiful. I'm not saying that about myself. I have evidence. People say it a lot. Waiters in restaurants, my husband, my mom, people tell me. My neighbor the other day said I was cute when he was watering his lawn. It's inappropriate. That is why we opted for the lounge seating in Sienna, which is just like a lazy boy recliner. The seats kick back. It's so cozy, comfy, for my husband. And I don't think he even minds coming down here in the middle of the night. I think sometimes he prefers it, which is fine with me. It's like having a guest house on wheels.
Okay, so cheesy as they are, they are relevant to what we're talking about. So now comes another big point, in at least my interest, was the announcement by Westar Energy that they were coming to Lawrence to install or retrofit 90,000 electric meters around the town, and what that would possibly do to us, because these are now computers. They're not just machines that are able to read certain data. So a colleague and I got very interested in this. We went over to see them in early 2010 and heard about, listened to their presentation, and mainly what they were promoting this was as a tool to be able to monitor your electric use and to be able to save money on it, which we thought was really a very limited approach to what this thing can do. Saving a few cents every month is great and admirable, but I think we thought there could be much more that can happen with it. So here was a big thing that was going to happen and make a big change in the way we live here. And I think that also fueled, pardon the expression, a lot of this interest, which was electric vehicles. Again, they were all being talked about at the same time. These are much more historic than that, but this was a project that Ford did. It was an electric garage. They had their hands in developing an electric charger as well. And so the whole idea between how this, now you're in the garage, what we've been talking about, the garage now starts to shake hands with the car. It does that by literally shaking hands via getting its energy every night when you come in, you charge it, you get in your car and you go away the next day. The interest in this is the fact that if you don't use the energy, you have too much of it. If you have enough, if you probably didn't, you could probably sell it back to the electric company, which is called V2G. V2, what is it? V2, vehicle to grid. Yes, sorry. But you know, we're not doing that yet. At least some of, not around here we aren't. But we are hoping that we can get to that point. But what it has done is to start to bring this technology into this space. So this was an interesting story that happened in 2004. And again, that's kind of how long this stuff is going on. It's actually been going on much longer. But when Hurricane Francis ripped through Gainesville, Florida in 2004, a person there, a doctor, was without electricity for a week. And when he actually lost power again during another storm, but this time he was ready. He had plugged his Prius, his Toyota Prius, into the back uninterruptible power supply in his house, and soon his refrigerator was humming and lights were back on. He said it was running everything in the house except the central air conditioning. So that's a very interesting fact too, that the car now is powering the house instead of the house powering the car. So remember that, because it could be applicable to a lot of the things that we're going to see ahead of us. It could be applicable to a lot of the people in the east that went through the Sandy storm. And as you probably heard so many stories about losing groceries and all kinds of things, still being in the dark actually. So with this Westar and the electric charger and all these things that were happening at the same time, my colleagues and I said, wouldn't it be cool if we did a showroom that featured all these things? You could walk in and you could see solar, you could see turbines, you could see the sustainable building. And we thought, well, why don't we actually put on a conference about it and bring some noted people in to talk about these kind of things and start heading KU and our efforts into a direction of being authorities or people to look to for these kind of topics. So again, some of my colleagues and I got together and we produced this symposium. It was very successful. It was featured in the Washington Post twice. And again, I have to embarrass Bob because Bob from the TRI Institute here supported us financially with this. So we were able to do it with his help, and the Spencer Museum's the Commons project at the museum. So, you know, that really started to form us into thinking of again, this vehicle and this house relationship, and that it was really more practical now than it could have been before. So that led back to that statement about, wouldn't it be cool if we really had this place that could demonstrate these things? Well, again, timing is everything, and we were able to have our 5th year architecture students who are engaged in this class called Studio 804 build us that building. And if you haven't seen it, you're all invited over. But it is on West Campus off Village Parkway, and you can see it from the barn here and the wind turbine. But this came much sooner than we anticipated, but it does have all those things we were talking about. It has the wind turbine, it has 32 solar panels, it has glass that changes density on your cue. It has a lot of things, and so we were really lucky to have this place in place that we could demonstrate that. And we have it open for visits and meetings and all kinds of other things. The day we opened was one of the hottest days of the summer in 2011 on July 16th. And we had 400 people come through the building, which 400 people in this town, that's a lot. So, and they were not looky-loos. There were people that were really interested in new technologies, new ways of saving some money in terms of their energy, questions about turbines, questions about solar panels. And today we use it for classrooms and lectures and conference spaces, as I mentioned. So now we're going to go back. You got to keep with me here. We're going to go back to the car for a minute, because we talked about the buildings and the sustainability of these and how we got to this place. But let's talk about cars for a minute. Again, I spent 40 years in Los Angeles, so I remember this. I remember going down the road, and occasionally you could glance in your rearview mirror to make sure there's nobody there when you changed your lane. And you could change the lanes without turning on your signal or being worried on the freeway of somebody being next to you. You know that's much different now. And driving has been has developed into a lot different as well. And so much so that you know, that a lot of people don't like to drive, and a lot of people would like somebody else to do the driving. If you're on a trip, nobody wants to drive really, unless you have one of those nice cars that we showed you earlier. It's kind of boring. So the fact that this illustration, which again is from the early 50s, had these people playing Scrabble, you know, he's not doing anything, he's part of the game. But what happens later? Technology has allowed us to do this. This is the Google car that is self-driving. I wouldn't get in it yet, but it's on its way. So you can see in just a few years we're able to come up with something like that. But again, I'm looking at my age and seeing some much younger people. But if you remember some old cars, this was about the extent of the technology that was in the car. And what did that have in it? It had a clock, it had a cigarette lighter inside the ashtray, and it had a radio. The buttons were really hard to push. Remember that? So, okay, well that was, you know, a number of years ago, but since then, that whole area has exploded. The gauges, the kind of instrumentation, the catalyst for creating new technology or using new technology and how you view your desktop, your screen, has propelled us into some new areas. And so, again, some of my colleagues, the same ones actually, got to thinking about, well, look at this dashboard. Do we really need to have all those gauges in it that are there? My son doesn't have a clue what RPM is, so here it has this big place on our dashboard, but he doesn't want it or need it. So what if we were able to deal with the real estate? You look at that dashboard and think, that's a big canvas. If we could paint our own picture on that canvas or include something in a modular form, we want to have this big, we want to have that small, we want to have a different layout. And maybe that layout could be conducted on your home computer that's just a few doors down from the garage, and that design of that dashboard could just be sent by Wi-Fi into the garage and adapted to your car, so when you get in the morning, you can drive off with a brand new dashboard. Very, very expensive for real estate, that dashboard. Everything's there for a reason, supposedly, but what can you give up? And that was a big question. So we formed, my colleagues and I, this group called the Adaptive Information Display. And we each approached it from the areas that was our areas of concentration. Mine was from design. We had a user interface professor. We had several engineers. So everybody looked at it from their own perspectives in terms of how would they deal with this. I came up with my students a PDA device, of course, since we're using these PDAs so much now, and they're that link that we need between the house and the PDA, or the car and the PDA. But before we're going on a long trip, you could do a diagnostic. We'd go through the entire car, read what's in the car in terms of your fuel levels, and there's many different kinds of fuels that you need: water, oil. So if you go through all that, you can use a very simple, this was done 2 years ago, which remember this picture because we're going to be seeing something very similar later on. But then all this stuff could be sent to your dashboard. So your dashboard might look like this, and you then control what's seen there. If time is very important to you, if you got a flight prompt, you need the weather. So you actually customize this yourself. So, you know, our collective research in this did get us some notoriety, which was what we wanted to do. We want to make KU a place that people look at for transportation of interest, whether it's distracted driving, whether it's fuels, You name it, we want to be able to have a corner on that market. So we did get some nice press from it. We continue to do so. A nice honor was to have the Transportation Research Board in Washington asked us to come there and have a poster that talked about this that was on display at one of their conferences. So that helped us also gain some notoriety, and again, that combined notoriety helped us get in the door to Ford, which Dennis mentioned. And last spring we did a project for them on, don't know how it relates, except that it is in the car, but Ford wanted to have us work on a child's safety seat, the car seats that you usually see little kids in. And that was interesting, and I think it was because it's based on the fact that today, if you have an infant, and I think it's from very infant to about 1.5 or 2 year old, they have to sit behind you, facing the other way. So the only way you can check on them, if you're a concerned parent, is to do one of these things. Well, that much time right there is 3 seconds, which can get you in a wreck. It's about as long as it takes. So our job is to make this probably the smartest car seat in the world, which it is. The parent could monitor their child from the back up on the front using Ford's Sync technology. The seat belts that you see here, it's the law to have a 5-point restraint for the child. We embedded the seat belts with sensors that could monitor the child's heart, perspiration levels, heat, whatever you wanted to know, maybe too much for some parents, but there are those first-time parents that are very concerned about the health of their child, especially at this age, that you would have all that information. So it was a pretty cool seat, and I think what's interesting about this is it was developed with all stuff that's out there already. We didn't have to invent anything, we just had to find it. And I think that's where we're kind of heading right now. Are we okay with time? Anybody? I hope. I'll speed it up. So now we go back to about both the house and the car. And we look at these things, and these used to be the American dream. Your grandfathers, whoever came over to this country, they worked their tails off to be able to buy these things, to live this dream of having the house and the car. I hope we still have that now, but the interesting thing about these things now, in today's world, is now with the introduction of the smart meter in the house and the amount of onboard computers that are on, not just Ford, but many models of cars now, there's a lot of power in terms of the onboard computers, that they're able to do a lot of interesting things. Well, if you look at the house with the new smart meter, lots of manufacturers like Whirlpool, GE are embedding chips into toasters, refrigerators, stoves, so they become smart appliances, and they will actually work with your smart meter. You can tell them to do things. You can tell them to check how much lettuce you have, so that when you go to the store, you can look at your PDA device, and it'll tell you you're out of lettuce, your milk's old, and give you a list of what it knows you need, so you can get that. But again, in the house, it can control all these things or monitor them for your benefit. But what's important for a lot of people in this room is it actually creates a new industry for us. Our jobs as designers, developers, architects, has been reinvigorated. I don't think there's a better time for industrial or interaction designers to be around. I think the promise of architecture and using new technologies and things is going to really help that field. I think third-party developers couldn't be around at a better time. Manufacturing is going to go up, technology innovators. It's a really great time for inclusion of these things in the home. Well, not much different than a car then. These technologies, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, what have they done for us now in the car? Well, remember that ashtray and radio bit. Now we have smart maps and locations. You can be pinpointed directly where you are by GPS. We have smart devices. We have health and wellness applications in the car. And I can tell you because it's not, I didn't sign it, we didn't have a non-disclosure policy with Ford, but they're actually working, they're not working on it, it's done. A seat that can actually monitor if you're going to have a heart attack. It can tell you that you should probably head towards the hospital because you're not doing too well. It also has the ability through facial recognition from the dashboard to be able to tell if you're an epileptic that you're probably prone to have a seizure in about a half an hour. So again, get off the road and seek some medical advice. So there are a lot of things that are happening in terms of health and wellness in the car that we don't know about. They're going to be coming about. They're going to be coming soon. The steering wheel, just think about it. Your fingers are holding the steering wheel, right? Well, it can check your pulse and a lot of other things. So they're looking at how those applications will work. Collision detection, you can tell now if there's somebody on your side, even if you can't see them. Entertainment, we know that one. Diagnostics, as I said earlier, if you want to go on a big trip, you can tell if your car needs anything before you go on it, and you can either see your mechanic or not. Voice activation is helping us give commands to the car where we don't have to take our hands off the wheel. Backup cameras, you see a lot more cars now that don't have dented fenders. That's because we have a backup camera. Cornering headlights are really great because they are headlights that will swerve when you turn. The headlights will go in the directions that you're turning. And run flat tires. These are tires that have technology that knows that if you get a puncture or if they start to get low, you get 50 miles to get to the nearest place to fix it, and it'll keep you going until that happens. So they're smart tires. So you got a car that now that's loaded with a lot of technology. And so what does that do for this profession? Well, again, the same people. Industrial and interaction designers, architects. I coined this phrase autotecture, which is the same thing. You have an environment, you have the climate control, you have structure, you have light, you have all those things you have in a building, you have it now in a vehicle. Again, for third-party developers, they're looking to create things for the cars, manufacturing. There's, again, I believe, a wealth of area out there for you to work within. But what's the problem now? Well, actually something didn't convert. These are supposed to be arrows. One going this way and that way, but the point is that now the house and car, they still don't talk to each other. You have this very smart house with a smart meter, and you have this very high-end car that has a very sophisticated computer in it, but they don't talk to each other. So that's a problem. They can talk to each other, and they should talk to each other, because there's this space right in here that I showed you, that is sort of a void. It's sort of a black hole that you can go into, and you don't want to, because you need that to be you need to be connected. Well, now there's things like the computer and the cloud where we can send information up to the host. And these little guys, again, this is what has made change the car's nature and how it performs, whether it's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, or the RSS feeds. And again, those are created things. My own idea of what I want to study more are key fobs. You know, those are the little things that your keys are on. They become smarter and smarter and smarter. These are some pretty smart ones. For $500 because it's diamond encrusted or some precious stones. That's if you have a Mercedes and you want to show off. But I think the important things and where these come into play is BMW just created a smart fob. Now with this fob, it not only does the things you want it to, unlock the doors, turn on the lights, it understands where you are. If you're coming to it, my car does that now. It knows I'm coming. At night, it turns on the light, unlocks the door, and gets ready for me, which is pretty cool. But this one, actually, you're able to buy things with it. It has a stored memory of money, like your bank account. You can for subway tolls or whatever, you just wave it in front of this. If you want to buy something at the store, you wave it. All this stuff is encrypted, and there is a lot of protection in it. People worry, well, if I lose this, somebody's gonna steal my car. Well, not really. There's a kill switch feature in it that you only get about 2 blocks, and that's it. So they're putting in a lot of safeguards into this that will help prevent that. But I'm really interested in what the fob will be able to do to make that connection between the house and the car. So I'll speed it up a little bit. A smart home was actually designed at as an exhibit at the Museum of Science Industry in Chicago last year, or this year actually. And again, they kind of took the approach of cleaning it up a bit, but they did a lot of things that were interesting, like using special lights, diesel systems to run some of the machines with, hydroponics, special workbenches that were 100% recyclable paper and bamboo, and on and on and on. I mean, this is not your normal garage, but it's pretty smart. So you can look that up. Very interesting. And how all these things are applicable in other areas is important too. Went to the fire station down the street here because we were looking at the emergency vehicles and the problems they have with distracted driving. And what I saw it was pretty interesting. They have now a feature where this tube, you can see this tube here, and there's some firemen here, it's hooked up to the tailpipe of the fire truck. Okay, so when you get a call and you have to leave, the gas goes into this tube, goes up into a chamber that keeps it, makes it safe, and the tube will pop as soon as the truck gets outside. So there's no fumes that end up inside of the firehouse. So that's kind of neat. But you know, that's high tech. This is low tech. And here's another guy who put his car in his living room. And his low tech version was, he just has a floor that lifts him up, he rolls out into the driveway, and then he turns his car on out there. So he doesn't have the fumes in the house. I don't know how he gets in the house, so that'd be a good question. So we're starting to see now, because of the house being a smart computer, all these manufacturing and things being done by designers. And here's a new toaster that will actually give you the weather forecast on your toast. You have to, you know, don't put peanut butter or jam on it because you won't find out what's going to happen. But this is as long as we're talking about toasters, Dan Pink, who's a famous, well, he's famous for me. He was an evangelist for designers, but he wasn't a designer. He was a writer. And Dan has written a lot of, he's written several books on the design process and their importance. And I think this is a good one, that a person uses a toaster 15 minutes a day. The remaining 1,425 minutes of the day, the toaster is on display. 1% of the toaster time is devoted to utility, while 99% is devoted to significance. And so it's a decorative item that barely gets any function. So, but then we get into appliances that do. Here's the old thermostat. Here's a newer one that probably, you know, probably a lot of people still have this one. But this is the Nest. Anybody seen the Nest? Okay. Well, you're probably not going to do yet either. There's supposed to be a video there. Eventually what's going to happen is all these wall plugs, when you get a new house or new building being done, there are going to be different kinds of outlets that are installed. This one is called the Node. It's a new application. You can put as many plugs in here as you want. It's got a little bit of criticism because kids can stick stuff in there, or this might look like a real rat's nest if you get more than 3 in here. So it's kind of neat because somebody's been thinking about it, but probably needs some more work. And here's our other kind of form. This is our old guy here. A couple of shocked faces, if you look at it, Disney style. Eventually, again, these will be outlets that might be installed, which are interesting because they have a USB plug right here. You can put your USB or your smart devices like your iPhone. If you need a charge, you just plug it in there. You don't have to have that thing that goes with you. And in this thing, you get a lot of these little USB ports. You plug them into your machines, whatever you have that accepts them, like a computer. And I don't know how many of you realize it, but even if you have your computer off, it's still taking electricity. It's still using electricity. So you can really turn it off and save things by using kind of these devices. This will monitor a whole bunch of these things that are plugged into it. And we have this company, which is called Control4. Again, all this technology is being able to be at your disposal. And we'll look at this video real quick. So you're going to go through here and you're going to be able to touch a lot of things. You can even turn your gas fireplace on and do a lot of things with it by just using your iPad or some other kind of smart device. It controls your whole environment. So we're getting towards the end here, but what I wanted to do is just create a scenario. These are all things that exist now. We're just packaging them together. And this is my trip home at night after I leave here, is that my car recognizes that I get near home by the GPS and readies the car for home and for my arrival. It begins winding down of any onboard programming of climate controls, adjusts lighting in the home and the car. It adjusts the AC heat in the garage and home to acclimate it to my arrival. The kitchen stove begins to preheat at 365 degrees. 9 minutes of determined cooking based on the reading in the fridge that the package had a barcode on it, and it sends that menu to a hands-free onboard concierge. Automatically it senses the car's arrival and opens the garage door, turns both the garage and home light and interior lights on, recognizes the car has arrived and it's safe to turn off, opens any needed doors for briefcase or other materials that need to be carried in. It transfers the hand-free telephone conversation that I'm currently engaged in via my hands-free device in the car to my PDA device speaker, so there is a seamless transition of that conversation from the car to the home. It opens the home door, closes the garage door, turns the lights on, and I didn't have to touch a button. And that's all it just happens. So I'm getting close to the end. I only have 3 more slides. My point here is that from the designer's viewpoint, the period we are entering into has the potential to be one of the most rewarding in concept development and application periods in history. Never before have we stood at the intersection of technology and its application as we do today. Industry manufacturers are rapidly inserting smart chips into appliances in our homes to enable them to work from our smart meter. Automobiles are now embedded with sensors that enable you to be aware of the world around you as you drive. Bundling what would be now considered to be as commonplace, developers are now bundling technology and placing it in applications that will enhance and even protect our lives. And this was a slide I used in other presentations, but this was a quote by Ivan Shamayev, who was a famous designer. Design is directed towards human beings. To design is to solve human problems by identifying them and executing the best solution. And then another slide I used to like, and because I'm represented here as the designer, often I have to tell people what I do for a living, which is very difficult. My parents, I don't think, ever knew what I did for a living. So I use this as a good example. Here's a bunch of doctors, and so you think, well, where's the design in this picture? Well, it's everywhere. And that goes for everything we do, everywhere we go, everything we see. Design has some part of it. And I think it's, in terms of what we've just looked at, how big of a role design has in that. Now, if you're not a technophile or you know how to do anything or just get afraid of what's happening in the future, don't be.
Enter invalid. Mode.
The Windows Phone 8X by HTC on Verizon. It features easy to navigate live tiles that are simple to customize. Just pin what matters most right to your home screen. Exclusively with DataSense.
Okay, so the very last slide is you're probably thinking, well, okay, now we've made this garage this whole new place. It's really cool. We're going to live in it. It's going to be the epicenter of the house from now on. The kitchen used to be, but I think it's going to be the garage. So what do you do with all that stuff in the garage? Well, we go full circle, and that's what you do. So that's it for today. Thank you.
Go and however they want to.
All right, well.
I wonder if you could think about people who are getting older and how these technologies of the garage and car might assist them as your design future.
Well, we have gone through a thing that I think would be very similar. My class has just finished a project Wednesday, actually, for Bayer Healthcare. And what we were charged to do was come up with the next generation's blood glucose technology. The metering, a lot of different facets to it. And the thing that we came out with in the very beginning with some help from Dr. Robbins from KU Med Center's Institute for Diabetics is that a lot of people, including myself, don't, even though I appreciate a lot of this technology, I don't want to sit down and do it. And what we came up with were things that you could just walk by and it would suck the information out of your device or your tester or whatever, and you didn't have to do anything. It's very important that that data gets collected and that it is in some form, because we actually interviewed a large pharmaceutical retail operation. And it's needed for Medicaid and Medicare because you have to have hard copies to be able to get reimbursed for your test strips. So people bring their meters into these pharmacists, they print out the readings on and then the people can get paid or get their strips. If they don't have that information, then they don't get it. So again, they want something that is very easy. We found that this is, if you make it the least bit complicated, it's not going to get used. So a lot of what I was hopefully trying to convey in here was it just happens. And the technology is out there that will ensure that it does. Okay, anybody else? All right, well thanks folks.
Thanks.
Hope you learned something.